Good day to all of the Fantasy Flyer followers. It's another episode from the Fantasy Flyer guys. My name is Derek. Over there is Taylor. You'll notice that we had Jordan on yesterday. Now it's time for Taylor. We're gonna go back and forth. Taylor is not going anywhere. Taylor, how you doing, buddy?
Good, good. It's good to be back. Holy crap. I definitely need to shake off some rust here, but man, football season is here.
It's the most wonderful time of the year,
Yeah,
and
right?
you can't tell me Christmas is because it's football. Um, as always, we are here to cover some interesting topics. We're going to touch on the RB market in today's episode, but first off, we're going to just kind of reiterate some news that we chatted about yesterday, which you are actually going to see after we've recorded this episode, which is the most inconvenient thing. But that's how editing works sometimes when technology doesn't work. So, in the episode you haven't seen yet, but you will see by the time you've seen this, now you're seeing this after you've seen that episode. I hope so. Did that make sense? You following along, camera guy? Um, we talked about how Travis Kelce had the injury to his hyperextended knee on Tuesday. They were waiting until Wednesday. It is now Wednesday night at about 10 o'clock on the Eastern Seaboard. And it looks like more and more like he's not going to play tomorrow. Jordan and as I've told Taylor before we started recording, Jordan and I both believe it would be silly to play him if he's not 100%. He is on the back end of his career. Father Time is undefeated. Sorry, Travis, you're 33, almost 34, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, it looks
Um,
like in October he'll be 34, so basically
yeah.
34.
So hey, let's. I would think they'd play it safe. That would be my betting. That if I was a betting man, that would be my gut check. But it doesn't look like there was any damage to his ACL, which is also good news. Little bit of a hit, I think, for the offense in general, but also not so much of a hit because there's so many weapons Patrick Mahomes can make use of on that offense. So I'm happy that I get to look at Jerick McKinnon in some of my redraft leagues instead of Travis Kelce,
Yeah.
and also in our Dynasty league because I can use a fourth running back if I have to. Um, but everybody else too, small bumps to Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, Marcos Valdez-Scantling. Um, I would not be surprised to see some 3 and 4 wide receiver sets that have Justin Ross in it.
Yeah, I love me some Justin Ross this year.
He's
He
sneaky.
could be
He's
sneaky, yeah.
Yeah. The other news that broke today, Cooper Kupp has been ruled out for week 1 against the Seahawks. I don't think this was much of a surprise to me or Jordan either, based on how it was kind of like, oh, wait until Wednesday, as if the doctor was going to be like, you're fine. The pain is imaginary. Go out there and play. Um, so yeah, he's going to sit out week 1 at least. From some reports, I say reports, doctors on Twitter, which sounds like a trick question. Um,
I believe you mean X.
yes, excuse me, on X. Whoa there. Um, I hate that.
Oh my God, it's
But
terrible.
it is. It's absolutely the worst. They changed to X, and I was just
Oh
like,
my God, who the hell cares?
don't
Pretty
care.
much, pretty much.
Do I still get my information from there? You bet your ass I do. But according to some of those doctors, whether they're actually doctors or your backwoods doctors, it's like a 2 to 3 week injury. And if it's a 2 to 3 week injury, it matches up. Sean McVay has stated that he is not sure he won't land on IR.
Yeah,
Cooper
that's what I
Kupp
was
will not
seeing.
land. And if this team can't, just to touch on a little bit about what we talked about yesterday that you haven't seen, and hopefully you're watching that before you watch this, is that Cooper Kupp is the engine for that team. And if you don't have Cooper Kupp, I mean, the team doesn't look amazing anyway. They're kind of a one-trick pony. Granted, it's a show pony. Okay. It's a show pony, but it's a bit of a one-trick pony. You know who you have to guard. And it generally doesn't work all the time anyway. But without Cooper Kupp, you're like, who's going to beat us? Ben Skoranek and Van Jefferson. So my win total for the Rams, my projected win total was like 6 before this, and now I think it's like if he goes on IR, it's like 5. Like the ceiling is 5. I don't like this team much at all. Just like from an eye test, like looking at what's on the field.
Yeah.
They
I
they don't
mean,
have
Cam Akers could have at least another good start to the season the way he ended last season. I'm sure at some point teams will catch on, but
this is kind of the part of the season where I would not be surprised if they were immediately went to the rookies. They went to a Puka Nakua, and they went to a Zach Evans, and they were like, well, let's see what you got. Because
right.
at this point, we opened the season against the Seahawks. I think they play the 49ers, I think week 3. And it's like you're gonna get hurt if you don't, you know what I mean? Like use
They
this
play the
as your
49ers week 2.
week 2. So I was
Yeah.
okay. So there you go. Like your first 2 weeks are basically like ship it, send it, mail it without him.
And then
You know,
Cincinnati the week after that.
yeah, they're like just put the rookies on and see if you got anything early on. That's my take on it. But those are just a couple quick news updates. We're gonna get into the bulk of the show now. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. We do all of those things for us if you could. We appreciate it at Fantasy Flyer. This episode is mostly about running backs, and this was I mentioned this actually yesterday on the show too, that I wanted to do this show with you, Taylor, because these running back contracts don't look like they're getting handed out the way they were, and it's taken me a little aback, just from a football standpoint, just watching it from the outside and going, these guys are playmakers. They really are. They can catch, they can run, they can pass block, they can do a lot of these things on a lot of different levels. And they're not getting these contracts. And I don't know what to think of it on a surface level. And that's before we even touch on the fantasy aspect to it.
Yeah, I mean, something that really, and I don't want to jump the gun on anything here, but I guess I may. Something that really caught my eye, if you will, was the fact that they weren't able to get a trade done with JT, Jonathan Taylor. And it, as far as I could tell, came off from the fact that Indianapolis wasn't happy with what they were getting for the offer, which means that they clearly think he's worth more. So why not pay the guy? Like, I get this whole thing of like plug and play running backs, but when you have a guy like Jonathan Taylor, like that is a huge asset. We've seen what he can do. He was the number 1 running back when he was healthy last year. Solid. He can catch the ball. He's not the greatest, but he's perfectly passable, probably better than average. I just don't understand when you have someone like that, why you're not paying him.
I didn't bring this up to Jordan on yesterday's show, but I should have, because I didn't tell him he is on your dynasty team. So as it relates to fantasy, you're at the heart of it. I mean, not to say that redrafts aren't, but we don't get a redraft that we get to adjust. We don't get any of that. We get basically, we have this player in May, and then stuff changes in July, and now you have a dynasty value that has fluctuated one way or another. Maybe it's not Jonathan Taylor and it goes up, for some folks like Alexander Madison. Perfect example. Was a great young asset. Didn't get really too much playing time the first couple of years. All of a sudden Dalvin Cook goes, he is the clear RB1 in Minnesota. Just because Dalvin Cook wasn't going back to Minnesota, Madison's value skyrocketed. And now it's Jonathan Taylor's, oh, well, I'm injured a little bit. Is he really injured? Who knows? And to be honest,
really.
Who cares? Because we know what it's about. He wants a more steady payday, and it seems like he's not going to get it from the Colts.
Yeah.
And to me, I just have to look at the Colts.
Oh, fuck. I can't believe you've done this.
I can't believe it.
Really?
I really don't. I get to your point, and Jordan said the same thing yesterday, as you guys may or may not know by the time you see this, as I'll say for the 4th time. He said that there's no reason why you can't pay him if you want something better in return, because you're just going to end up paying them.
Right.
Jordan pointed out that at one point the Colts had asked for Jalen Waddle from the Dolphins, because the Dolphins have inquired. They were one of 3 teams.
Mhm.
And are you not going to pay Jalen Waddle?
Right.
Like, what is the gain here? You're not going to get a pick back with Jalen Waddle for Jonathan Taylor, especially when they have 3 capable running backs as it is, and they just drafted one. So I don't understand what the end game is. And a really good theory to this is basically they wanted to make sure he wasn't going anywhere. Despite telling him you can go look for a trade, they were asking for too much in return with these other clubs. And that made sure that Jonathan Taylor stayed put. Now, is that going to give Jonathan Taylor a contract? No. Is that going to make Jonathan Taylor stay in Indianapolis? Probably not. Jordan, of course, lives in Indianapolis. He is a Colts fan. There's a lot of broken hearts surrounding this situation. So, and that's understandable. But if running backs in general, just to stay away from Jonathan Taylor for a little bit, if they're not getting these contracts, that they're in essence getting shunned, there's not a lot of re-signing going on as it pertains to the fantasy aspect, and more so in Dynasty will be the point of our discussion. But it matters with redrafts too, because the running back position is less valuable overall.
Yeah. I mean, you're always going to have a handful of guys unless, the entire NFL just completely changes how they go about this, or they just don't recognize a guy on this level. But like, you have Christian McCaffrey, you have Austin Eckler, Saquon Barkley. I'll even throw in, definitely Josh Jacobs last year. I'll throw in Derrick Henry because he caught some balls last year. Like, you have a handful of these guys that are the traditional, maybe traditional is not the right word, but bell cows. But to your point, a lot of teams have transitioned to this committee where you have, the bruiser, first and second down guy, and then on third down you have a more pass catching type of guy and a blocking guy. And don't get me wrong, that completely works. You can plug and play. You have a lot more flexibility when you want to go get somebody cheaper. It's not costing your team a lot, but I mean, I'll say it again. If you have a talented guy like any of those guys I just mentioned, or JT, you got to use that weapon. That is one of the best weapons on your team, and pay the fucking, excuse me, man. Pay that guy.
He said the dang thing.
I already said it. Can't take it back.
Nope. I don't
Yeah. Just pay him and have a good team. Come on.
You suck, you jackass.
100%. Like, there's no the transition here from bell cow to committee is going to be a painful one for all fantasy owners, because you won't know who's going to, there's going to be no rhyme or reason to who gets 60% and who gets 40% of carries. There's going to be no rhyme or reason to who gets third down, who gets it on the goal line. If you're going to run these guys, I mean, you, to a certain extent, there's obviously like the David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs setup in Detroit right now. That's probably the best example of a team that I could say. David Montgomery is a third down downhill, or as a first down downhill, and as a goal line. And then Jahmyr Gibbs is probably the other 2 downs and passing in the red zone.
Yeah.
And that's where they're going to split. You talk about Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley. Those are probably 3 of what I can think of maybe 8 true bell cows in the league. Christian McCaffrey's not a bell cow anymore.
Yeah,
That's
aging.
the scary. When Elijah Mitchell is active, Christian McCaffrey gets between 60 and 65% of carries, or of snaps, I should say. I won't even say carries. 60 to 65% of snaps. The rest of it is, there's a lot of Elijah Mitchell, a little bit of Jordan Mason in there from what last year it looked like. Of course, we'll see how that breaks this year, but they're keeping Elijah Mitchell involved in San Francisco. So Austin Eckler, I guess you'll bell cow him. But I'm talking guys that are 75% snaps or more, like as a bell cow.
Yeah.
Actual out there, have the skills to pass catch, our first, second, third down, 75% and it's Jacobs, Pollard, Barkley, Eckler, Mixon, maybe on a good day Mixon, because now probably more so. I don't think with P Ryan gone, it'll probably be more like that.
Mhm.
I'm running out of people. I'll
Right.
tell you that. You know what I mean? I'm sure there's probably Madison will probably join that list this year. I can
Yeah.
see him as being a 75%.
I
But
mean, you could probably throw Najee Harris in there just because that's how
yep,
Tomlin likes to run his offense. I don't know if
that's a
I would
good, and he's
necessarily.
by far the best running back on the Steelers. So yeah, I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, I
Even
mean, I like Warren this year a little bit, but that's
a
just
lot of
not how
folks.
Tomlin likes to run the
Right,
offense.
right. I would put that right at 75-25, right in that, and that's a guess. Obviously, you don't know until it's done. But I can't think of many others. You even when you had now you had a returning Brees Hall in the Jets who could probably by week 4 or 5 handle 80% of the snaps and be they go out and they throw $8 million at Dalvin Cook.
Right.
And you're like, well, they're not throwing $8 million at somebody to ride the bench for 14 weeks. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
So now you know Dalvin Cook is button into the snaps and he's going to get 40. Like his low this season will probably be, supposing he's healthy, 30 to 40%.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's
I
it's
mean,
amazing. It's
someone we
amazing.
didn't mention was Bijan. I mean, I didn't mention him, but he is capable of being a bell cow. We just
Mhm.
don't know,
Yep.
especially since that offense loves to run the ball, and
Yep.
they, I don't know, maybe they'll, Algier did perfectly well. What the heck's
At a
that?
thousand yards last year.
Yeah. What's the wide receiver turned running back that they have? He's been around.
Patterson.
Yes, Patterson.
As they like to call him on NFL Sirius, and I don't know if it's Cordero or Corderell.
I always say Cordero.
I did
Um,
too.
so I mean they have those two guys, which like Bijan is so much more talented, but I don't see them not completely phasing those guys out, So I just don't know
I
if how much of a which way it's gonna go.
Bijan could easily join that 75% list, but
Right.
that kind of brings it to the next the way that we relate this back is if we take a look at this past draft class.
Hmm.
So we're talking about the uh potential for bell cow work, and there's two ways to look at this. There's from this past draft class going forward, and there's this past draft class in 2023 versus the 2022 draft class. Starting in 2022, there were only two that were probably going to be bell cows coming out of that, one being Brees Hall, the other being Kenneth Walker. It is now year 2, and neither are going to probably be bell cows.
Yeah, the Brees Hall situation is kind of surprising. I don't know if it's like just injury concern, the way he's coming along. It sounded like he was doing well, so I'm not really sure why they went this route. I mean, obviously you want some insurance. You want to be able to fill in for a guy that, is that talented if he goes down again. So maybe there's a little bit of
So
scared. Maybe it's Rodgers being like, "Hey, I'm not playing for a couple more years. We gotta do something here. I want to get to the Super Bowl." You know?
Rodgers definitely had something to do with bringing on Dalvin Cook. Like
Yeah.
and that's not a bad thing. That's veteran leadership telling you we can use some more veteran leadership. You have to look at everyone else around Aaron Rodgers. Who there has 5+ years of experience?
Right.
No one. Right? Like there's not a soul in that locker room, at least on the offensive side of the ball, who is other than maybe CJ Uzama. Tyler Conklin, I think, is going into his 5th year or
I was
sixth
gonna
year.
say he's got to be on the line there. Yeah.
So he's right in that neck of the woods. But other than that, like Aaron Rodgers went, I got nobody here who's really like who can go, yeah, listen to Aaron. He's dealing with Garrett Wilson, who's young and great and teachable and excellent. He brought in a bunch of these younger wide receivers, Alan Lazard, borderline. I think he's going into his 5th year as well. But
Yeah. I guess he has
offensively,
Cobb.
Cobb's came with Aaron.
Yeah.
So Aaron was like, yeah, call up Randall to help out with the wide receivers. They all kind of followed Aaron, and that's my take on that situation, and it kind of seems that way.
Yeah.
Going back to our previous point with Brees Hall, and I'm just checking last year, he bell cow usage he never hit.
Hmm.
Not once even when he was getting hot before his ACL injury. Highest amount of snaps, he had 69.
This is so cool.
69% of snaps in week 5. So that was it. Everything else was 60, 66, 67. Michael Carter was no less than 35% in any week. So, and not to say that, obviously they crossed over, but Brees wasn't there. Kenneth Walker being the other one, who is the only, I would say, true bell cow out of the entire 2022 draft class, going for all of it, being the guy. And he got helped out. The Carson injury that lingered and forced Carson to retire. That helped him. Rashad Penny getting injured helped him. But all those things pointed to a lot of weight being on Kenneth Walker, and he responded. Going into 2023, to start, neither of those guys will probably be bell cows, like I'd mentioned. Now we go into this draft class where, other than Bijan, there is no clear person who's expected to be a bell cow this year or potentially even next year. And that just points to this being a huge problem for dynasty leagues and a huge problem for running back positions if you're not getting a Saquon, a Pollard, a Jacobs, maybe a Madison. Rashad White's probably not going to be there for Tampa Bay. Like, there's so many other players that are just going to be stuck in these committees where they're 22, 23, 24, 25 on these rookie deals, probably fully capable of being bell cows, but they have a 27, 28, 29, 30-year-old running back soaking up 30 to 40 to 50% of the snaps they could be getting just to get a payday. Not to say that they don't deserve it, but the committee approach seems to be how they're going. Now, to follow this up into the football aspect, how do we as dynasty managers, what is a plan that you would probably have for fixing this? Because the only thing I can think of is I don't want that first round pick unless it's another Bijan like running back.
Yeah.
I'm trading down for multiples in the hopes that eventually it will turn into a committee or away from a committee and go into a bell cow role for one of these running backs.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I mean, the biggest thing that comes to mind is, what are the most valuable things you want in a running back if they're going to be in a committee situation? You want touchdowns, you want catches. Catches are worth more than, unless they're breaking off huge runs and you're in a PPR league, catches are worth a lot. So if they're out there in those versatile packages, that's a guy that I'm going to be looking for. But those don't often go hand in hand where you have, a goal line back that's also the pass catching back, unless you have the bell cow. So that's like, I just kind of like, everybody's saying, well, what the heck? You didn't give me an answer there. I mean, you saw my strategy the past 2 years in our dynasty league. In the second round, I grabbed 2 running backs that are like, they had a good college production. They're in a decent situation. I'll give an example. Kendre Miller, Kamara is out the first 3 weeks. He's also older, so he may have opportunity in the future. So, I mean, it's a dynasty league. You're planning for the future, obviously, but yeah, it's you definitely, it's a lot more flyer-like these days than it was.
That's right up our alley.
Yeah.
He said the magic word, Chompy. It worked out for you in many ways last year.
With Dameon Pierce, yeah.
Not in the sense of the team that you had. You didn't have the pieces around him to go for a chip. But Dameon Pierce was a snag, and he was. I think I wasn't very quiet about it last year. He was on my radar as well. But it's all about when you pick and who's available, and it's a perfect example of the Dameon Pierce scenario where it can just work out going forward.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the situation you're looking for, right? Where he's kind of the only guy, and there's been some hype, and like you gotta go for it. Whether it only lasts a year or not, you don't know. But at some point, you might be able to trade him for some assets if you feel it's only going to last for a year.
Right, and that's trading for assets is the imperative term. You have to know when it's time to flip.
Exactly.
Pierce probably isn't the one to flip right now. There's question marks as to whether an Isaiah Pacheco is a one to flip. You got yours in the second round. Pacheco was a 4th round last year for our buddy Ian. Shouts out to Ian. He's been on the channel before. And that worked out. He traded Pacheco and many other things for other assets during this offseason. And
Yeah,
it worked out. He turned a 4th-round pick into essentially top, second, bottom, first value when it was all packaged. And that's just knowing when to pick them and knowing when to flip them. I would
the poker song's coming to mind. You got to know when to fold them. You got to know when to whatever.
Kenny,
Kenny, yeah,
Kenny Rogers.
yeah, I think so.
Gotta know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em. Know when to walk away, know
Exactly.
when to run. So yeah, that's to me the dynasty portion of this is the toughest on this because, like I said, you're holding these guys, their values flex so much, and it seems like we're all on the downward slope of the roller coaster that we can't do anything about, and we just kind of have to ride it out.
Yeah. I was just gonna say another thing that I've been kind of toying with, and I mean this isn't like totally new in terms of the committee approach as opposed to bell cow, but it is still in sort of this. We're on the tail end of this transition, right? It's becoming more of a solidified thing throughout the NFL, whereas a couple of years ago there was decent more, bell cows, and it was still sort of some teams were doing it, not all teams were doing it, but now it's becoming much more of like the strategy. So if we are to approach the situation in the same manner, you kind of almost look at running backs as a redraft situation. Maybe when you're doing it, and I'm talking about dynasty now, like you look at guys from a redraft perspective and say like, okay, he's going to be in a decent situation this year, and maybe you look next year and you say there's upside for him to continue to do this, and then some of the other guys you fill in and you just say they're going to be good this year and that's all I care about. And that that depends on your situation. Do you have a chance to go for the chip this year? If you're planning for the future, obviously that's where it gets a little more complicated because this whole committee situation.
Yeah, the redraft league becomes difficult because you don't know. In some scenarios, you won't know who's the real value, which goes back to what you were saying with just do I want pass catching? Do I want goal line? What do I want with this? So to that, it's a little less shaky. You can kind of ride it because every year you get to reset. And we go through the league right now. And real quick, I'm just going to pause. Let's see in the AFC East. No real Ramondre. Ramondre is probably pretty solid. You could probably trust in him. J.K. Dobbins, pretty solid. The AFC North, we already talked about Najee, Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb's for sure a bell cow. Should respect that. And then there isn't one bell cow scenario in the NFC North. There isn't Tony Pollard in the NFC East and Saquon in the NFC East. There isn't any in the NFC South. Maybe Bijan, but that's to be determined, right? You run out really quickly with these guys, and I am a fan, and I'll just end. I'll start to cap off and conclude the video like this. I'm a fan of taking some of these assets as a dynasty team and trying to get multiples later on. Last year you had Damian Pierce, and I forget who your second running back was.
Zamir White.
Zamir. Which
you mean in the draft?
Yeah. You're right.
Yep.
It was Zamir. And, one of them hit, one of them did.
Right.
50-50. You now have this year you took Kendre Miller and Devon Achane.
Yeah, and then I later took Tajay Spears. That was he fell to me,
And
which I
and
those
Spears,
are three flyers. Yeah.
Yep. And Spears could be the successor to Henry because I'm still a fan of them trading Henry before the trade deadline this year.
Right.
I think that'd be smart. One contender offers him too much, and they're going to say, "Yep, you can have 9 weeks of him." It's totally plausible. But letting that going that route instead of trying to find. I took Zach Charbonnet this year, before either of your picks, and then after your picks, I took Roshan Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Roshan Johnson could be the Damian Pierce this year. The running back scenario in Chicago is bleak, but it could also not. He could be there with Khalil Herbert until the end of time.
Yeah.
We don't know. The taking 2 instead of banking on 1 is just starting to seem like a way better way to go, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And as far as dynasty is going to be very tough on that going forward. Even even in our league where we have to fill at least 3, sometimes 4 running back spots, it'll benefit us, but it'll benefit us by filling the spots, but maybe not by points per week.
Right. Yeah, and I'll just add, I mean, something that's kind of different about our league is, the overall cap situation and the fact that players get arbitration, they get increased that way, and then they also get increased by the way that the league thinks they're worth. I won't get into the details. Anyways, price increases, you end up having to
Well,
let
no, you're
players
right.
players
There's a
go.
value. There's a
Yeah.
huge value aspect to this that is not. It's something that as fantasy owners, if we realize it, we just have to know when we're giving up too much for the potential.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that, so for our league, it's nice to grab these, for the most part, cheaper running backs in the draft. They're not always going to be in a situation where they're going to be able to produce year one. You only get, I would say, max 4 years, but if they're good, you're going to get max, like, sometimes you can't get more than 2 years, maybe 3. So like you have a 3-year window of potential championship depending on your team structure. And if you can get these guys cheap in the draft and they're in a situation where they could hit that year, that's what you're looking for. Different dynasty leagues don't necessarily have that situation where you're losing a guy after 3 years because of they're just inflated and you can't afford them anymore. So that's a little different where, if you can acquire somebody that you're in the running for the ship and you can acquire somebody that's actually going to help you out and their situation as opposed to some of these flyers. But yeah, as far as dynasty goes, in our situation, you're kind of going for some of these flyers, and in other dynasty leagues, it's really tough right now with the committee approach to anticipate the future.
Yeah, there are more and more running backs who will not have the same amount of work. And you know what happens when they don't have the same amount of work? It means someone took their job.
They took our job. They took our job. They took your job.
That is going to wrap up the first running back episode of Fantasy.
Tell that dude to shut up.
There you go. That is going to do it for this episode of the Fantasy Flyer. We will be back Saturday will be the next post, I believe. I got to try and get this video and another one up, the other one that you guys probably haven't seen but should see before this one so you can see this one so that one makes sense and vice versa. I literally nailed that explanation 4 times and somebody needs to leave a like and share and subscribe.
There's like time traveling happening here.
But if somebody can understand it because I made it that way, like, share, subscribe right now. Right now, right here.
We now have a bunch of scientists that follow us.
That's might as well. For Taylor, this is Derek. As always, I said it on the episode you haven't seen yet. I'm not going through that black hole again. We're gonna continue the ritual that was from season 1. It is in memoriam for season 2. As always, we'll end our shows with Bob Barker. Rest in peace. You guys take care. We'll talk to you soon.
It's good to be back. Peace out.
Self-control of that population. Have your pet spayed or neutered. Goodbye, everybody.